Okay, my take on this Josh Taylor-Jack Catterall fight. What happened and why did it happen? Well, in the first round, Jack Catterall came out and punched Josh Taylor in the face with a big left hand. And that really set the tone of the fight. Because Josh Taylor, to me, looked flustered and embarrassed to have been caught with such a big punch so early by this opponent. Because, of course, Josh Taylor's been in there with the likes of Regis Prograis and all these other elite fighters. I don't think he expected that Catterall would be able to land on him so flush in the first round. But Catterall did. Taylor went in there looking for revenge, and Jack Catterall was ready for him with all these slick moves. He was pinging Taylor with the jab. He looked to have faster hands, faster feet. He seemed more fluid and coordinated. And I don't think Taylor was expecting any of this. I don't think he was ready for any of this. Not making any excuses, but that's just the way he looked to me. He seemed surprised that Jack Catterall was so good. He was chasing the fight the whole time. He was several steps behind. And of course, Catterall now is using Taylor's aggression against him because Taylor's trying to force the fight and nothing is coming smoothly. Nothing is coming organically, right? And we've seen Taylor in fights like that before where he's had to force it a little bit and he's always managed to come good in the end. But here against Catterall, he just couldn't. Now, I do wonder whether Josh Taylor actually has issues fighting fellow southpaws. Of course, he did fight Regis Prograis and he won that fight. But Regis Prograis seemed to me more focused on landing his own big shots than Jack Catterall was. Jack Catterall, like I say, was just feeding off what Josh Taylor gave him. So using Josh Taylor's aggression against him. And it's not like Catterall was running. He wasn't at all. But like I say, he was the counterpuncher, definitely the counterpuncher in the fight. And he was popping Taylor with that jab beautifully. And the more ragged Taylor got, of course, the more Jack Catterall was able to lead off as well. So, yeah, I do think that maybe Taylor has stylistic issues fighting fellow southpaws, particularly someone as slick as Jack Catterall. And I didn't realize this. Maybe I misheard, but this is what I think I heard on the ESPN broadcast. They said something like Catterall had sparred Floyd Mayweather and was it Canelo Alvarez? I was like, wow, I never realized Catterall was sparred those guys. And he looked to have a bit of that Mayweather slickness in there against Josh Taylor. And it did not look like Taylor's night. The longer it was going on, you were thinking, is Taylor ever going to get into this? Is he ever going to be able to hurt Jack Catterall? He was trying to impose his size and strength on him, but nothing was working. It was all ineffective. Jack Catterall was too slick for him on the inside. There was a point where Jack Catterall ended up with a bloody nose, but, you know, one solid jab, the right place on your nose can bloody your nose. So he seemed fine in there, perfectly comfortable, absolutely bang on it. You see Jack Catterall's eyes from the beginning, razor sharp. And see, that's the difference in mentality going into a fight like this. For Jack Catterall, this was absolutely the pinnacle of his career. Whereas for Josh Taylor, I guess he thought this was a routine defense. A homecoming fight against what? A soft touch? Maybe Josh Taylor thought that because of the fact that he's been in with so many top fighters in the past. I'm not making any excuses for Taylor. I'm just describing what I saw in terms of body language and the way Taylor was fighting in there. And of course, Ben Davison was telling him to press the fight and so on. And I guess that's what he had to do. Tim Bradley on the ESPN broadcast was saying that Taylor wasn't adjusting as the fight went on, particularly after the knockdown. Taylor gets dropped in the 8th round. And by the way, I can't remember Taylor getting dropped before. Has he been dropped in a fight before? I don't recall. But he was hurt this time. That wasn't a flash knockdown. He was actually hurt. You could see his legs, his eyes when he got up. He looked a little wobbly there. And maybe Jack Catterall, in light of the way the decision went, might kick himself for not really going for it. Actually, was that towards the end of the round when Josh Taylor was dropped? Doesn't say the minute here. Maybe it was towards the end of the round and he was saved by the bell. I can't remember now. But yeah, Josh Taylor looked hurt in that 8th round. Now, some people say that Josh Taylor won some of the later rounds. I wasn't scoring it round by round, and I would like to watch it again. As you guys know, I don't like to jump to conclusions and just get caught up in all the hysteria of something. But watching it first time around, I certainly felt that Jack Catterall won the fight. In fact, I was thinking Bricktop must be popping champagne at this point, especially after that 8th round. Bricktop must be popping champagne with Errol You know, giving the pig some extra food and all that because he's got an undisputed world champion here. I was thinking about how bizarre is that? Jack Catterall, undisputed world champion. It just seems bizarre, right? But anyway, the fight went on. Some people could give Josh Taylor a few rounds there. It goes to 12, and I knew that there would be some shenanigans. I think most of you guys knew there was going to be some shenanigans with Josh Taylor fighting in Scotland. It wasn't Scotland, right? It was certainly a pro-Taylor crowd. His homecoming, undisputed champion, all this kind of stuff. We were all expecting shenanigans. And it is horrible in boxing when you expect a robbery, you know? And then when the scorecards are read out, it's a split decision. The first judge had it. Let's have a look here from the Taylor side. The first judge had it 113, 112 to Catterall. That's too close. You see, when you hear a scorecard like that, it's too close. That's when you know there's a problem. 113, 112 to Catterall. The next judge had it 114, 111 to Taylor. 114, 111. Bear in mind, Josh Taylor got absolutely schooled for the first few rounds. Yeah? After the knockdown, maybe he picked up a few rounds there, but he was getting totally outboxed early in the fight. And he got dropped. And then, of course, there was that point deduction from Taylor. Was there a point? There was a point deduction from Catterall as well, wasn't there? Yeah, so Catterall dropped Taylor. Then there was a point deduction for Catterall. Then there was a point that, it was all madness. And the referee, by the way, was terrible. I don't know what that referee was up to, but he was, just like Tim Bradley said on the ESPN broadcast, interfering way too much in the fight. Needed to leave him alone and let him get on with it. Too much interference. And the point deduction from Catterall was terrible. The point deduction from Taylor was bizarre. At the end of the round, Taylor kind of patted Catterall on the stomach. Was that really to me, it looked like a pat on the stomach as in, well done, good round or whatever. And the referee took Josh Taylor and said, oh, that's a point off. What on earth was that referee doing in there? Bizarre. So, terrible officiating all round by the judge. Of course, the final judge had it 113, 112 to Josh Taylor, a close decision for him. Now, one thing I will say is that Andre Ward pointed out that Josh Taylor was forcing the fight, and particularly in the second half of the, other than the 8th round, particularly in the second half of the fight, it was not a good visual when a guy is pushing you back all the time. He's leaning on you against the ropes. He's throwing punches. The judges at ringside can't always see whether those punches are landing clean or not because they don't actually get as good a view as somebody who is watching on television a lot of the time. So they might not know that Josh Taylor's shots are not really landing that clean, that they're getting blocked and so on and so forth. Again, playing devil's advocate. But yeah, that's the only thing I can see for Josh Taylor in this fight with regards to the scorecards is maybe the judges thought that Taylor was doing better than he was because he was so aggressive and he was always on top of Jack Catterall. But realistically, you would have had to have been quite generous to Josh Taylor based upon watching his fight first time around live, not having scored it. My impression is you'd have to be pretty generous to give him that fight. And that's exactly what they did. They gave it to Josh Taylor rather than Jack Catterall. And it was pretty much universal condemnation of that decision. People at ringside were shocked. Sky was shocked. Ben Shalom said that he feels embarrassed because he put the show on. And of course, he's a fledgling promoter at fledgling promotional company boxer. So he may well feel embarrassed. Although he isn't Josh Taylor's promoter, is he? Ben Shalom. Is Josh Taylor signed to Ben Shalom? I don't think he is. I think he's with Top Rank. And so they were putting the fight on in the UK in collaboration with Top Rank or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, he was embarrassed. Johnny Nelson said it was a terrible decision. Who else was there now? Natasha Jonas said it was terrible. Jamie Moore looked like he was ready to explode, of course. Jack Catterall's a trainer, I think he is. And yeah, all round, everybody thought it was horrible. Everybody online was saying it was a horrible decision, just all the way around. And of course, Jack Catterall didn't even stay for a post-fight interview. He was so distraught. He went straight to the locker room, and you can't blame him. This guy trained his whole life. This was the pinnacle for him. And he went in there and let's just say Josh Taylor was fortunate to walk away with his belts. Let's say that. Now, again, if we want to talk about why the fight turned out the way that it did, I think that stylistically, Taylor's always going to have an issue with Catterall, first and foremost, the slickness and all that. But I don't think it would be honest to ignore the possibility that Josh Taylor did underestimate this guy, that he just couldn't get himself up for someone like a Jack Catterall as much as he can someone like a Regis Prograis. And there's a thing that occurs in football, I'm sure a lot of you out there are football fans, where certain teams actually perform better. They'll go on a run where they actually perform better away from home. I guess it's the lack of pressure from their home fans and so on. They like being the upsetters. They like doing what Catterall did, being the counter punchers, hitting their opponents on the break and that kind of thing, playing away from home. And so Josh Taylor perhaps was suffering a little bit from that, suffering a bit from the extra pressure in front of his home fans, the homecoming, putting a lot of pressure on himself, saying, I've been in there with much better people than Catterall. See, sometimes some fighters know themselves. They know that they can't get up for fighters who aren't prestige, big, elite level names. They know that themselves. So a lot of them actually don't want to go in there with those kind of opponents. Yeah, because they won't get motivated enough to be as sharp as they need to be to produce their best form. And I wonder whether Josh Taylor's like that. You know, a bit like Tyson Fury, he's had a few iffy performances against people who weren't elite. So, yeah, and Josh Taylor, of course, has been fighting back-to-back tough fighters for a long time, away from home, and so on. So, again, I'm not making any excuses for Josh Taylor, but I'm just looking at different factors here in the fight that could have affected whatever the judging, that could have affected Josh Taylor's performance, and, of course, Jack Catterall's performance, because, again, fantastic boxing. Outslicked Josh Taylor, totally outboxed him. Was the faster guy, the more athletic guy, the better jab, better coordination, everything, all round. So, yeah, it was what it was. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. How did you score the fight? Can you see any way in which this could have reasonably gone to Josh Taylor? Because it looks like hometown cooking in the eyes of the vast majority. And, you know, I like to play devil's advocate with these controversial fights where people are saying it's a robbery, especially before I've scored it myself. I like to say, let's just sit back, because there are a lot of fights that people call robberies. And when you watch it in the cold light of day, you're like, I don't think it was really a robbery. I mean, it was a close fight, you know? So I don't like to jump on the hype train. I like to be a bit circumspect with these things, because fights can look different the second time you watch them in the cold light of day. But watching this one, it seemed, you know, the body language of both guys, the clean punches, even the CompuBox stats. And we don't read too much into CompuBox, but even the CompuBox stats were wide in favor of Catterall. I'd like to see the round by round CompuBox stats, because again, if CompuBox is saying that one person landed more punches than the other in a 12-round fight, you don't know how that's divvied up per round. Yeah, it could be one round where one guy lands 30 punches more than that's unlikely, but just giving an extreme example, 30 punches more than the other guy, but in all the other rounds, he's landing 3 or 4 punches less. You understand? So by the end of the fight, the guy who lands more punches might not have won the fight, like realistically, because he hasn't won the rounds. Boxing is scored on a round-by-round basis. It's not scored total who landed the most punches through the course of 12. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, long story short, it's going to be difficult for, I think, anyone to score this for Josh Taylor. But if you did, that's okay. If you scored this fight for Josh Taylor, I want to hear from you in the comments section below. And, you know, it's no problem at all. Let me know what you think. And do you see Josh Taylor differently now after watching that? Do you think that, like me, perhaps he's got an issue with fellow southpaws, especially if it's a slick southpaw? Tim Bradley said that he was going to have to move Josh Taylor down, you know, readjust the pound-for-pound rankings, because Josh Taylor doesn't seem to be as good as he thought he was. Let me know what you guys think. Oh, and before I go, the possibility of Jack Catterall getting a rematch, I would say, is slim and none. Because Josh Taylor is the money. Jack Catterall, let's be real, compared to Josh Taylor, was an obscure fighter. I know he was mandatory challenger and all that, but there's no real impetus from the boxing industry for Jack Catterall to be up there with the big fighters right now. So the best Jack Catterall can hope for, I would imagine, would be for his promoter, Frank Warren, to appeal to the WBO, because Frank Warren's always had a good relationship with the WBO. But in terms of all the sanctioning bodies having a look at it and overturning the decision, I can't remember. Maybe it's happened. Maybe one of you guys can tell me a fight that I actually did a video on back in the days. I can't remember, but I can't recall off the top of my head ever seeing the decision in a world championship fight being overturned. I've seen a few results overturned where a guy gets knocked out, but later on they deem it to be an illegal blow and then it gets called a no contest. I've seen that happen. But in terms of a guy winning on the scorecards and then an appeal goes in and then the decision gets reversed, I can't ever recall seeing that. Again, I've seen people get busted for PEDs and then they change it to a no contest or whatever. But again, other than that, I can't recall anyone successfully appealing the decision and getting it overturned in a world title fight. Yeah. So I wish Jack Catterall the best, but I have to imagine as good as it's going to get for him might be Frank Warren lobbying the WBO, who he's very tight with and has been for many, many years, and maybe getting Jack Catterall another shot at that belt, which would be, I guess, a undisputed shot again, or maybe only the WBO be on the line. I don't know. Maybe they could get Josh Taylor stripped. Frank Warren really leans on the situation. We'll see. And of course, Josh Taylor, having already been undisputed, he might not fight that hard to keep hold of the WBO belt if Frank Warren was able to do something like that. Okay, keep that WBO and, go fight somebody else for it. I'm going to defend these belts maybe one more time and move up to 147. He might feel that way. And of course, after the fight, the final thing I should talk about, after the fight, when Josh Taylor was interviewed, he didn't concede defeat. He said, oh no, I definitely thought I won the fight and so on. And a lot of people are really upset by this. And what I would say to you is, what else do you expect? Fighters are not like the average Joe down the pub. Their mentality is not like that. They don't think like that. And the reason they're in the position that they're in, like a guy like Josh Taylor, an elite fighter, an undisputed champion, one of the main reasons he's in that position is because he doesn't think like the guy down the road, your mate Joe or your mate Bill or whatever. They have a much higher level of confidence and they have a completely different perception of things. So when a guy like Josh Taylor with that level of confidence is a young kid coming up in the gym and he's sparring and he gets absolutely battered in sparring by somebody, in his mind, he's not focusing on all the shots that were landed on him. He's focusing on the few shots that he landed on his sparring partner. And he's going home and thinking, yeah, I got hit with a lot of shots, but I had him, and if I work on this and I work on that, I can get this guy. Because so in his perception of that spar is different to the people that watch the spot. To the people who watch, oh my gosh, he got absolutely battered. But in his mind, he's thinking, yeah, he landed a few shots on me, but look at the shots I landed. I actually did all right. This is the mentality of winners, okay? This is why a guy like Amir Khan can get knocked out so devastatingly by Bradus Prescott and Danny Garcia and keep coming back. You see, most people in Khan's position getting chinned like he did against Prescott in such a humiliating fashion, most of them would never be the same again psychologically. Most people, even the average fighter, they'd be wrecked by something like that. But Khan's level of self-belief was far higher than most people. That's why he was able to come back from things like that. He would always find something in his own mind to give him confidence. Fighters, elite level fighters, have a glass is half full mentality at all times. So you can't get too mad when after a fight, which everybody believes they lost, they come out and say, oh, I think I won the fight. You can't get too mad at that. because this is an aspect of the fighter's mentality. This is why they've managed to achieve that level of success, because they think like this. Yeah, because they don't get down on themselves as easily as the average person does. They're insufferable optimists. That's what they're like, at least with regards to fighting. Yeah, maybe other aspects of their life is different. When it comes to fighting, they are insufferable optimists. They always see things optimistically. So a fighter is not a good person to score their own fight, particularly before they've even watched it. When they're in the fight, they're in the moment, and they're focusing on their own successes. They're not focusing on the opponent's successes so much. They're thinking about their own successes and how to build on them. You see it? So, yeah, to the average Joe, it seems odd when Taylor's coming out saying what he's saying, but I understand it. It is what it is. Of course, I'm not saying I agree with it, but I understand that kind of mentality after that kind of fight. Now, obviously, this is not like Deontay Wilder, where he gets absolutely blown out the water by Tyson Fury, gets beat from pillar to post, doesn't win a round, gets dropped, gets stopped, and then he's talking about the ref was in on this. And I mean, that's extreme, way, way, way beyond the pale, okay? But that's not what Josh Taylor's doing, of course. So there are levels to this. And the Deontay Wilder level, I think, is beyond anything I've seen before in my life. That's real extreme, even for an elite fighter. But I was going to say something about Wilder. I'll leave that for another video. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm out.